Part 14. Adventurer of the Elf World. Author, Wu Nangkuang Song. Chapter 131. Xiu quickly adjusted his mood, looked at the road ahead and shouted with a smile. Tokiwa City, let's go. When Dro heard this, a faint smile appeared on his face, and he stepped on the accelerator, and the speed of the car increased a lot. Along the way, Xiu noticed that there were actually many roads on both sides of the road, not just the road from Pallet Town to Tokiwa City. According to Dro, most of them were roads leading to some villages and towns, and they were also the life supply lines of the city. Because the city does not have so many places to farm and build pastures, but the city needs these products, such as vegetables, fruits, grains, and industrial raw materials, etc., which all rely on the production of these towns. The maintainers of these roads are generally alliances, and the big cities actually pay for them. Xiu actually found that there were not many vehicles traveling on the road, most of which were trucks, and there were very few private cars. Buses passed by from time to time. It seems that the real world is not just a few simple locations in the game, there is more life here. There was no trouble along the way, it was very smooth, but the speed slowed down when it was near Tokiwa City. Because the entrance and exit in front were blocked by traffic. There are so many cars. Xiu couldn't help but think of some bad memories when looking at the situation in front of him. What do you think? There are dozens of towns like Pallet Town around Tokiwa City, not to mention the smaller villages, and there is only one road into Tokiwa City. Xiu glanced at the surrounding situation, and those truck drivers didn't seem to be in a hurry at all, obviously used to the situation. The car took a long time to slowly enter the suburbs of Tokiwa City, and the vehicles that had caused the traffic jam just now dispersed after entering, and the traffic on the road became sparse again. And the situation became more obvious the further in, there were few private cars on the street. Drive a little further into the center of Tokiwa City, which is more prosperous. Let's settle down first and then go shopping. Xiu responded casually, his attention was all on the street view outside the window. Professor Oak also noticed Xiu's situation, thinking that he was curious about Viridian City, so he didn't say much. How should I put it? Professor Oak misunderstood Xiu's idea. What big city has he not seen? He died suddenly in a big city that year, and those steel forests had no attraction to him. Xiu observed the surroundings just out of habit. He found that the development of Viridian City was not very good, far from the scale and structure of the big city in his impression. The level was about the same as that of the Crimson City. As the car moved forward, the more and more prosperous central area was considered to have restored Xiu's impression of the city. The Pokemon Center is in front, and we will stay there this time. The car slowly drove into a place similar to a square, where many cars were parked. The Pokemon Center of Viridian City is just in the south of the city. From the appearance, the Pokemon Center here is indeed the scale of a big city, but unfortunately the construction style can only be regarded as average, and there is nothing outstanding. At first glance, it did not leave a deep impression on Xiu. After seeing Professor Oak get off the car, Xiu did not rush to leave. Instead, he took out a mask and put it on. The white coat that never changed was also put away, leaving only a casual outfit. After completing all this, he continued to walk forward. After climbing a flight of stairs, there was a wide glass wall. The front of the first floor of the Pokemon Center was almost entirely made up of glass walls. Xiu could clearly see the people inside from the outside. The gold-plated stripes in the middle of the glass wall showed the location of the entrance. As soon as he approached, the door opened automatically. Once inside, the walls around were all light yellow. The front desk was located in the middle of the hall. There was a staircase on each side of the hall that led to the second floor. There was a fence around the second floor. Xiu glanced at the hall and found the structural route map here. After a brief observation, he found that the structure was very different from that of the light red city. There was no environment provided for water Pokemons here, and the battlefield was not on the side, but behind the hall. Looking at the sign, there were additional facilities such as restaurants on the side. Professor Oak walked towards the front desk neatly and did not forget to remind Shiu. "What are you daydreaming about? Take out your ID." Shiu took out the ID he had prepared long ago and followed the doctor. "Hello, 2 people, 2 single rooms." Dr. Oak put a slightly old ID at the front desk, and Shiu followed suit. The person on duty at the front desk was a young lady in uniform, but it didn't look like Joey, just an ordinary staff member. She took Dr. Oak's ID, opened it and took a look, and the whole person was obviously stunned for a moment. The standard smile on her face collapsed halfway, and it looked a little stiff. But she quickly reacted, and then said to Dr. Oak with some trembling, "Hello, please take off your mask so that we can confirm your identity." Dr. Oak didn't embarrass the girl, and took off the mask directly. The young lady at the front desk was obviously different now, staring at Dr. Oak's face with her eyes, and her face showed a little excitement. It looked like she had seen her idol. Fortunately, her professionalism was still there, and she didn't lose her mind because of seeing Dr. Oak. She simply completed the formalities and handed over the ID with both hands, then bent forward and nodded. "Okay. Thank you." Dr. Oak smiled and nodded at the young lady. Shiu found that Dr. Oak always had a gentle and decent attitude when he met those outsiders, just like a well-read scholar. It was different from the lazy life and research fanaticism in the research institute. "No need, you're welcome, this is what I should do." The front desk lady's face flushed with excitement, and the whole person seemed a little incoherent. Shiu looked at this star-chasing scene and was a little speechless. He raised his hand and knocked on his ID on the table and said, "Excuse me." "Oh. Sorry." The young lady finally reacted, smiled at Shiu, took the ID and started to operate. 2 pairs of keys with house numbers were pushed out. Shiu took them and walked upstairs with his luggage. "Doctor, you really have so many fans. You can meet them casually," Shiu complained casually in the elevator. "It's all just a false reputation brought up by people with ulterior motives, adding trouble." After hearing this, Dr. Oak didn't look very happy, but seemed a little unhappy. Shiu thought about it for a while. Professor Oak's personality really didn't like these empty things. From another perspective, this kind of empty reputation really bound him. No wonder Professor Oak would rather stay in his own research institute to do research than go out and hang out. Adventurer of the Elf World. Author, Wu Nangkuang Song. Chapter 132. The single room in the Elf Center is the most expensive, but there are also several sizes of double, 4, and 6 people. But there is a reason why a single room is expensive, because the environment inside is better and it is equipped with a computer. This is why Joey has the financial resources to do these things. After going upstairs, Shiu and Dr. separated and each returned to their own rooms. I have stayed in a single room in Jianhong City before. Comparing the two, there are many differences in style and equipment. Of course it didn't matter to him. After simply settling in, before even touching the computer, Dro's voice came from over there. "Is it okay? Coming." Shiu opened the door and went out. Dr. was standing casually at the door. "Come on, I'll take you around Jobin City. There are some interesting places here." Shiu was originally full of expectations. After all, the trip was funded by public funds. But as soon as they stepped out of the elevator, a middle-aged woman came towards them and stopped the two of them. "PhD." Shiu noticed that this person's uniform was different from the previous staff member, and looked more advanced. And his aura is impressive, obviously he has been in a high position all year round. In addition, Shiu had also seen similar uniforms, and he quickly determined that the person should be Joey from Jobin City. Dro's answer below can be regarded as validating his statement. "Hello, Miss Joy." Daramu put on his serious and solemn look again, nodded slightly towards Miss Joy, then raised his hand and pointed at Chiu. "This is my assistant Chiu." Ziyuninj, who is familiar with Droe, feels that he is a little helpless. Miss Joy obviously already knew about Chiu's situation. She just glanced at it and then turned her attention back to Dromu and said, "Doctor is really on time. Let's go to the office to discuss some aspects of this event. There will be a lunch meeting later." Facing Miss Joy's invitation, Drama glanced at Chiu next to him, with a trace of helplessness clearly visible on his face. He raised his hand and patted Chiu on the shoulder and said, "You go on your own first, I have something else to do." Chiu didn't say anything when he saw this scene, he just nodded in agreement, and then silently watched Drama leave. Sure enough, big people are very busy, and even this kind of busyness is beyond their control. Chiu muttered something quietly and then walked out of the elf center. It's almost the same as shopping by yourself, but more comfortable. But when Chiu just walked out of the elf center and had not yet crossed the square, he discovered a man in strange clothes. It is clear that spring has passed and the weather is getting hotter, but this man is wearing a coat, covering his body tightly. His movements are completely aimless, walking around the square, his eyes constantly scanning the people coming and going. What's even more outrageous is that Chiu's glance just now was noticed by him, and now that person is walking towards him. Chiu instinctively stopped and adjusted his body slowly to a state of readiness. As long as his opponent showed danger, he would have absolute confidence whether he was counter-attacking or running away. But the strange thing is that the weird man didn't seem to understand Chiu's body movements. Instead, he accelerated closer and started to put his hands on the coat on his body. "I'm afraid I encountered an exhibitionist today." Chiu immediately reacted, his eyes became full of danger, and he moved slowly. As long as the man dared to open his coat, he would definitely cut off his descendants with this kick. The man came closer to Chiu, glanced around the area, and then shouted in a low voice, "Brother! Do I want something good?" As he spoke, he opened a small corner of his collar to reveal what was inside. When Chiu Ben heard what he said, the strength on his feet relaxed a little. When he saw the other party's goods, he felt like he couldn't laugh or cry, and he casually complained, "Brother, it's just a few books. Is this necessary? It's been tough lately, so it's better to be careful." Brother Dai smiled and explained, not forgetting to introduce the goods he had on hand, "How about it, I have a full range of varieties here, the latest." Listening to his words, Xiu felt a little familiar. Wasn't that one of the sales tactics he gave to Xiao Yuan? Xiu suddenly became playful and asked Brother Dai, "Is your book cheaper than the bookstore?" "That's for sure. My books are half cheaper than in bookstores, and I can get any book." "Your book is so cheap, is there any problem?" "I'll tell you the truth, these books are all defective, otherwise they wouldn't be so cheap, but it doesn't affect reading, the content is the same." Xiu simply asked a few questions and the other party answered them fluently. It was obviously not his first day doing this. "Look at me bro, can't you just take out this book and buy it? This is a defective product. It was originally not allowed to enter the market. Naturally, someone would come to catch it, but they never caught me. There was someone above me." Brother Dai was quite proud when he talked about this, which made Xiu laugh from the bottom of his heart. "Aren't you afraid that I am a policeman?" "Brother, don't be joking. I have been in Jaban City for decades. I know what those people are like better than you. You can tell that you are from out of town." Brother Dai obviously didn't care much about Xiu's words, but Xiu's words also aroused some reactions. I heard him ask, "Brother, do you want to buy it?" "Buy? Take a look at what you have first." Xiu talked to him for a while, and then picked a book he hadn't read and bought it. "Come find me if you need it in the future, Brother Coat said a few words enthusiastically and then wandered around looking for a target. Xiu weighed the book and thought it was not a loss to spend a little money to learn about offline sales channels. Just now, after asking around, the price was indeed very different from his previous price, and it had increased a lot. But it seemed that those ghosts raised it themselves. After all, Xiu transferred all the risks to them, which was inevitable. Xiu flipped through the book in his hand and found that the quality was not as good as what he had controlled before, and there were problems with printing and typesetting. I don't know what he thought of. Xiu, who originally wanted to play in Tokiwa City, suddenly restrained his mood and walked towards the second-hand bookstore established locally. When Obara reported before, he had established all the bookstores in several big cities. As a core figure, Xiu naturally knew the location of the bookstore and found the bookstore in a short while. The location of the second-hand bookstore is very unique. It is not crowded with those regular bookstores, nor is it near the Elf Center, nor is it in the bustling area of the city center. Instead, it is located on a very ordinary street. Xiu saw the logo of the bookstore from a distance. It is a half-opened book with waves behind it. Thank you 201906261120433375 for the reward. Thank you for your support. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Adventurer of the Elf World. Author, Wu Nangkuang Song. Chapter 133. It looks like a washed-up rock on the coast. This thing was designed by Xiao Yuan himself. Xiu was not involved in it, and he didn't care about this kind of thing, as long as it wasn't too outrageous. As for the name of the bookstore, it is somewhat literary, called Shiwi Bookstore. The store is smaller than those of large bookstores, and the decoration is more youthful. From the outside, you can see metal bookshelves standing in the store dividing the space. The left and right walls are also bookshelves, with some books scattered on them. A flat surface was propped up in the direction facing the door, and some books were placed on it, but they all looked a bit old. There is also a low-price promotion sign erected next to it. As for the front desk, it was at the corner of the door, and there was a young man sitting there. Compared with those big bookstores, this place seemed deserted. Xiu stood at the door for a while, but no one came. Of course, this is also because the neighborhood is not a commercial street, so there are few pedestrians on the road. However, not far from the bookstore is the school in Jaban City, which is why I chose this place. When Xiu walked into the bookstore, the young man just looked up and then lowered his head. I was dumbfounded as soon as I went in to repair it. It was different from the decoration I saw outside. The environment inside was very poor. I don't know what happened. Moreover, Xiu took a look at the books on the bookshelves and found that only about 30% of them were genuine old books, and the rest were pirated books produced by his own family. As for the types and contents, they were incomplete and a bit messy. The prices on the books also changed greatly, which was somewhat different from what he had in mind. The people in this store did not organize and classify these books, which was different from what he arranged for Xiao Yuan. Why are these books so messy? Xiu Sui pretended to complain, but the young man didn't even pay attention to him and was minding his own business. Xiu simply walked over to the front desk, raised his hand and knocked on the table and asked, "Are you doing business because the books here are so messy?" The young man slowly raised his head to look at Xiu, and dropped a word with a somewhat unkind look. "That's how it is here. If you want to buy it, buy it. If you don't want to buy it, leave. What's your attitude? Now that I'm a guest, do you still want to do business?" Xiu's attitude immediately changed. His tone suddenly became aggressive, and he shouted at the young man, "Call your boss out." "I'm the boss, do you have any questions?" The young man didn't feel any fear when he heard Xiu's words. Instead, He had a sarcastic look on his face. Xiu looked at him a little funny, but he didn't pursue the matter any further. He shook his head and said, "If you are the boss like this, it would be weird if you don't close down." After saying that, he turned around and left, with no intention of staying. The young man's eyes were filled with obvious hatred, and his lips moved slightly as he cursed in a low voice. "No matter how cool I am, I'm not afraid of getting picked up when I go out." Xiu stopped at the door and narrowed his eyes slightly. It seemed that what he was most worried about had happened. Although Obara is very smart and capable, she lacks experience, has not considered the ugliness of human beings, and does not have the skills to control this situation. This is also one of the problems with taking too big a step at once. She can manage one store just fine, but if it expands to so many stores at once, it is normal for management problems to arise. What's more, communication in this world is still at a rudimentary level, and the internet is not developed yet. The existing problems cannot be changed by one or two people. Xiu paused at the door for a moment, his narrowed eyes slowly relaxed, and then he raised his head and walked outside. He had no intention of wandering around, so he went directly back to the room in the Elf Center and turned on the computer. After a busy tone, a figure appeared on the screen. Over the past few months, Xiao Yuan has changed a lot from his previous appearance, and he looks much more mature. What happened? The first thing Xiao Yuan said after seeing Xiu was to ask, which sounded more or less helpless in Xiu's ears. "That's not true, I can't even chat with you." "What are you talking about? Are you free?" Xiao Yuan looked a little impatient and roared at Xiu, "I'm very busy right now. You can ask 2 more people to come back for work matters, there is no need to follow everything. One person's energy is limited. I would like to find someone to share the burden, but some people have gone somewhere to play." Xiu felt helpless for a moment when he heard O'Hara's strange words and could only repeat what he said before. "I really have something going on." I know. "Are you okay?" Xiao Yuan replied perfunctorily, seeming to be organizing some documents in his hands without looking at the camera. Xiu didn't say much about her situation, but directly pointed out the problems he found, and also pointed out some problems in her management. Xiao Yuan, who originally didn't care much, stopped what he was doing and listened intently to what Xiu said. And the expression on her face became increasingly ugly. "The one we arranged to go to Jaban City is one of the better performing employees recruited after you left." This was obviously her own work error. Although she had only been in charge for a while, she knew very well how serious the consequences would be if this matter spread, and could even destroy her previous efforts. The two chatted about the problem of the Tokiwa City bookstore for a while, but the more they talked, the more problems they found, and Xiaowen's expression became more and more ugly. Xiu certainly noticed her look, and knew that although it was her negligence, he was also responsible, so he comforted her. "We don't make money from the bookstore. This is just to occupy a position. It's a good thing to separate the piracy line. At least things here won't interfere with this, and you have done a good job in piracy." Xiao Yuan knew what Xiu meant, but she didn't affirm her meaning at all. Instead, she said, "I always do what you say. I know what level I am at. Saying and doing are 2 different things. I know very well that you can make this effort. Xiu is a worker, so flattering is natural." A few simple words made Xiao Yuan dizzy. "No, I just..." Xiaowen's mood was no longer as angry as before, but eased down, and asked Xiu tentatively, "Then when will you come back? Although this person has little impact on the company, I think this problem still needs to be solved. Who is the person in charge of Tokiwa City? Give me his contact information and I will handle it." Xiu seemed not to hear Xiaowen's question and spoke to himself. When it came to business, Xiao Yuan could only restrain his emotions and sent the things to him. As soon as Xiu received it, he said to Xiao Yuan, "You are also very busy, I will not disturb you, and we will talk next time when I am free. After that, he disconnected first. Xiao Yuan looked at the black window on the desktop, and for some reason, a surge of anger surged from the bottom of his heart. Xiu, Adventurer of the Elf World. Author, Wu Nangkuang Song. Chapter 134. Xiu stared at the address and name on the screen in a daze. Just now, he had learned some information about the young man from Xiao Yuan. After checking the information of the man, he was not the first to work in the company. He was promoted to manage a branch in Tokiwa City because he performed well in the previous part. In other words, he was an old man, familiar with the company system, and was aware of the series of problems caused by the company's lack of supervision. Just now, when Xiu and Xiao Yuan checked the accounts, they found that this person not only had a bad attitude to damage the company's image, but also did not do his job well. He also privately modified the price to make false accounts, bought some bad books at a high price to swallow up the company's property, etc. The simplest thing about this matter is to throw the contract out and let him pay. However, Xiu estimated that the reason why this guy dared to do this was not only because he understood the defects of the company's system, but also because he had been in contact with the pirated line that had not yet been separated, and knew the source of funds of the company. In other words, the formal way is almost impossible, and there are great risks. A knock on the door interrupted Xiu's thinking. Xiu turned off the computer and went out to open the door. The visitor was a staff member of the Elf Center. When Xiu opened the door, he said, "Miss Joy, please let the guests go down." "Okay," Xiu nodded slightly, "I'll go down right away." Xiu turned back and tidied his appearance in front of the mirror. His current identity is Professor Oak's assistant, and to some extent, he also represents the face of the doctor. Even if the doctor doesn't care, he should be careful. After confirming that there is no big problem, he followed the staff down to the first floor, and then turned into the restaurant on the side, where there is a separate private room. This place is obviously not open to the public, and is only used for important guests. "Please," the staff very considerately opened the door for Xiu. Xiu was a little uncomfortable with such treatment, nodded slightly embarrassedly, and then walked in. The private room is not as simple as it looks from the outside. The back part is embedded in another place. This structure makes the space inside appear wider. In the middle of the private room is a dining table that can accommodate more than a dozen people. At this time, the meal has not really started, but it is already full of people. And Xiu found Professor Oak among them at a glance. For some reason, he put on the white coat again. He was chatting and laughing with those people at the dinner table, showing his sociable side. The people over there also noticed Xiu's presence. Miss Joy, the host, introduced everyone present first. "This little brother is Dr. Oak's assistant." Then she waved to Xiu and shouted, "Come and sit down." Xiu didn't mean to talk nonsense. After nodding slightly, he walked to the seat next to Dr. Oak and sat down under the scrutiny of those people. Everyone present obviously didn't know Xiu, and had never even seen him, but after hearing Miss Joy's introduction, they showed great enthusiasm and praised him one after another. Words like young and promising, good-looking, and bright future came out of their mouths. As they talked, they praised Dr. Oak in disguise. Anyway, they tried to please him in various ways. Xiu knew very well why they were like this, so he didn't feel any praise when he heard these, but was full of embarrassment, but it was difficult to say anything, so he had to sit with a smile on his face. After sitting down, the attention of those people returned to Dr. Oak, and Xiu was temporarily spared. Listening to those people's nonsense, Xiu suddenly regretted it a little. Originally thought that high-end meetings could learn something, and at least he could get to know a few people. But now he only felt mindless flattery. This feeling reminded him of the bad things in socializing in his previous life, and his mood began to become depressed. But his face was still smiling. The dinner started soon, and the dishes were also rich, but those people didn't touch much, most of them were communicating. And Dr. Oak just ate a little and put down his bowl and chopsticks, and casually echoed those people. When the dinner was almost over, Shiu suddenly felt Dr. Oak's gaze, looked up and looked at him, and instantly he understood something, pretending to whisper to Dr. Oak's ear. "Doctor, we have another trip later, we need to go over." The voice was not loud, but the few people nearby could hear it. Dr. Oak smiled faintly when he heard this, and said to Miss Joy on the other side, "Well, I have something else to do, so I'll leave first. You guys take your time." Without waiting for Miss Joy's response, he turned around and nodded to the people at the table, then stood up and glanced at Shiu. Shiu naturally understood, and stood up and walked out. Dr. Oak casually said hello and goodbye, and then quickly caught up with Shiu. As soon as he walked out of the private room, Shiu seemed to collapse, and his straight back bent down. Dr. Oak didn't mean to stay at all. When he passed by Shiu, he patted his shoulder and whispered, "Go." Shiu had a helpless smile on his face, but he could only follow. Dr. Oak didn't mean to go back to the room, but hurried out to the car outside. When Shiu sat in the passenger seat, the car had already started and rushed out. Professor Oak's disguise instantly disappeared, and he casually complained, "This kind of social event is really boring. Didn't the doctor go to discuss the event? Why do those people look?" Shiu didn't say his own evaluation, but Dr. Oak obviously understood what he meant and explained casually. "It was discussed before. Those people only came during the dinner. I heard that they are all rich people in Viridian City and sponsors of this event. They only care whether the money invested is beneficial, and they don't care about the progress of the event." Dr. Oak snorted coldly and added with a little disdain, "What's more, the event is a cooperation between the official Viridian City Alliance and the Joeys. They don't have to worry at all, because worrying is useless and there is no place for them to intervene. What exactly is the event like?" Shiu also understood why those people just tried so hard to curry favor with the doctor, but he was more curious about the content of the event. "It's similar to the celebrations of previous years, with several activities spliced together, some competitions, and inviting several famous trainers to fight." Dr. Oak didn't seem to care much and added another sentence. "These celebrations are held almost every year to stimulate consumption and create a platform for trainers. Otherwise, where do you think there are so many competitions for trainers to appear on TV? Like the one that just ended a while ago." Listening to Professor Oak's gossip, Shiu suddenly had a deeper understanding of the strange structure of this world. Adventurer of the Elf World. Author, Wu Nangkuang Song. Chapter 135. What kind of job is a trainer? As the person who controls the power called Pokemon, if the Alliance does not manage it, there will definitely be chaos. So the Alliance must find something for these people to do, such as a large number of battles. This thing makes money from TV broadcasts, the audience buys tickets to watch the game, and the venue makes money from consumption. No wonder those places like to find all kinds of weird reasons to hold events and battles. Because this thing has a wide audience, the audience pays and there is money to be made. There are also a large number of competitions to find things for trainers to do, so that these people will not be bored and cause trouble in society. There will be gym battles and league competitions in the long term, and this kind of event battles in the near future. Anyway, the Alliance will not lose anything. What's wrong with you? Are you upset? Dr. Oak noticed that Shiu was in a daze and asked. Shiu responded with a wry smile, shaking his head and explaining, "I just thought of something." "That's great." Professor Oak smiled for some reason. "I saw you didn't eat much just now, now I'll take you to a very good old restaurant to try." Shiu couldn't help but want to laugh when he heard what Professor Oak said. The two of them ran out of the dinner party and went to eat in a blink of an eye. I don't know what those people would think when they saw it. The vehicle drove into the old town of Viridian City, and Professor Oak also introduced some things about Viridian City in the past. The first batch of cities built have their own functions, such as Viridian City is famous for its rich material resources. The nearby towns all have some relatively famous materials, such as the medicinal fields and flowers in Pallet Town. As a key location connecting Viridian Forest and Quartz Plateau, Viridian City was originally a fairly large town, but it did not reach the exaggerated scale of a city. Until the establishment of the Alliance, Viridian City quickly developed due to its geographical location and resources and became one of the large cities in the Kanto region. It sounds simple, but behind it is the rich natural resources and elf resources of the evergreen forest. It has developed for decades to reach its current scale. "We're here," Dr. Oak said, and the car gradually drove into an old street and finally stopped on the side of the road. Shiu got out of the car and looked around, and found that this place was very different from the high-rise buildings in the central area just now. The buildings here are not very high, and the exterior looks full of historical traces, that is, the walls are aging. And those architectural styles have a very, Shiu doesn't know how to describe it, anyway, it is different from the modern style. Shiu also found that this area is obviously a residential area, most of those buildings are for living, and the first floor is used as a storefront. However, there are few young people coming and going, most of them are middle-aged and elderly people. "Let's go, I haven't been here for a while." Dr. Oak looked at a store on the street, and when he talked about this, he obviously felt impatient, and walked over there. Shiu followed slowly and observed the store for a while. It was a little past lunchtime, and the restaurant was not busy. Only a few old people occupied a table and chatted. They looked like they had finished eating a long time ago. "Boss. Both of you." After sitting down, Professor Oak greeted familiarly, and a middle-aged woman came out from the backstage with a pot of tea in her hand. After putting down the teapot, she asked Professor Oak, "What do you want, our restaurant?" Before the woman finished speaking, Professor Oak skillfully said a few names of dishes. The woman seemed a little surprised and looked at Professor Oak twice more, but she did not recognize Professor Oak in casual clothes. After nodding, she turned to the kitchen. After the people left, Professor Oak smiled and said to Shiu, "You don't need to bother those people when you eat here." Shiu looked at the smug look of Professor Oak and smiled. "I'm afraid that most people who know Professor Oak would not think that he has this side. However, those who don't have much contact with elves would not care much even if they see Professor Oak on TV, because they don't know what this person represents, so it's normal not to recognize him." The dishes came up. They didn't look as beautifully presented as the ones just now, but they were cheap and large in quantity. The full plate looked very appetizing. Dr. Oak smiled and picked up the bowl and chopsticks to start eating. Shiu was just about to pick up the chopsticks when he found that Dr. Oak looked a little strange. "What's wrong?" "It tastes wrong." Dr. Oak smacked his lips, and a trace of doubt appeared on his face. Shiu tasted the dishes and found that there was nothing strange. They were just ordinary dishes. They were not very good, but they were okay. So he didn't understand why Dr. Oak was like this. "Boss." Dr. Oak didn't mean to give up, but called people out. The woman who was cleaning up nearby quickly put down her tools and came over. "What's wrong with the customer? The next dish has to wait." "No." Dr. Oak raised his hand to interrupt the man, pointing at the dish on the table and saying, "This dish doesn't taste right." The woman was stunned at first, her eyes swept back and forth between Dr. Oak and Shiu, and then asked, "Does the customer think there is anything wrong with the dish?" Dr. Oak frowned, thought for a few seconds, and put another chopstick into his mouth. After simply chewing, the confusion on his face not only did not fade away, but became more obvious. He shook his head and said, "Anyway, it just tastes wrong." When the woman heard this unreasonable reason, She thought for a moment that the two of them were here to cause trouble. She grabbed the apron around her waist with both hands, looked at the two of them warily, and defended. "Guest, what do you mean by this? Our store has been established for decades, and the neighbors nearby know our conscience. It's just that Droe seemed to be still immersed in the dish on the table, looking a little dazed. Shiu noticed that the atmosphere was a little out of control, so he spoke to mediate. Our boss has no other intention. He just came here before and found that the taste is a little different, so he just wanted to ask if you have changed the chef or changed the ingredients." "Change the chef? No. My husband has always cooked it, and the ingredients are all fresh." Shiu changed the topic with just a few words, and at the same time calmed the boss's excited mood. Of course, this is largely because Shiu Xian gave him the meal money. I have to say that this place is indeed of high quality and cheap, and everything is not expensive. After sending the boss lady away, Shiu went straight to work and ate the food. He is really hungry, and just like Daramu said, there is no need to be restrained here. However, Daramu looked gloomy. After eating a few simple bites, he put down the bowl and chopsticks with a strange look on his face. Thanks to Wuxin Zhengfeng and Lei Saki's gang members for their rewards. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Adventurer of the Elf World. Author, Wu Nangkuang Song. Chapter 136. Shiu knew who Daramu was, so he didn't ask him pretentiously. Instead, he dealt with the food in front of him faithfully and showed the basic qualities of a cook. But as soon as he took a few bites, two people came out from the kitchen. One was the proprietress, and the other was an ordinary middle-aged man who could only be the boss. The man walked towards the side, observed the two of them first, and then said, Guest. I just heard that you are not satisfied with these dishes." Daramu came to his senses and looked up at the man, with a strange look on his face. "Why is it you?" "I remember." The man looked suddenly enlightened when he heard what Droe said, and quickly asked. "The guest hasn't been here for a long time, right?" "It's been more than a year, almost 2 years." Daramu looked at the person in front of him, his tone was a little uncertain. "That's right. I only took over the store this year. The previous chef was my father. There is still a gap between my skills and my father's. It is our mistake that the customers think the taste is not right." As the man spoke, he glanced at the table and added, "Sir, you still remember that our store must be an old customer of my father's. I didn't entertain you well, so let's forget about this meal." When the woman on the side heard this, she quickly tugged on the man's clothes and whispered, "They paid him." "How can you lose money in business?" Shiu Ziran reacted and waved his hand casually. "The food is fine, there is no problem, so the money must be given." Before the man could react, Shiu asked him, "What about your father? Died?" The man was silent for a moment, and then added, "I collapsed from exhaustion a year ago. We stayed with him in the hospital for a month, and finally left." "I'm sorry." Although Shiu had guessed it, he was more or less infected by the other person's emotions and felt a little sad. "It's okay, guests can use it with ease." After the topic ended, there was nothing more to say. The shop owner gave a slightly awkward greeting and turned around with his wife back. Only then did Shiu look at Daramu and greet him. "Dr, you have guessed it a long time ago, right?" Daramu pondered for a moment and whispered, "This store has been here for more than 30 years. The taste has changed, and I am more or less uncomfortable with it." Shiu could see it, and Daramu probably guessed it right away. What he was struggling with was not the change of taste, but the change of things and people. This kind of elderly people have special concerns. The two came out of the store. Shiu was full, but Daramu didn't eat much. He just ate a little, which was a little different from his usual appetite. "Let's go, I'll take you back to the elf center first." Xiu immediately reacted after hearing this and asked casually, "Doctor, what's going on?" "I'm going to visit some old friends, are you coming?" Droe looked a little depressed, which was very different from his usual image. "I'm just taking a look around Jobin City, so don't worry about me, doctor." After Xiu finished speaking, he walked towards the street without waiting for Dromu's reply. Although he is an assistant in name, he is actually a breeder, and his relationship cannot be said to be really good. It is undoubtedly a pain in the ass to attend those gatherings for the elderly now compared to the past. After all, no one likes a stranger in the middle of a party with old friends. Wander around the streets of the old city and look at the buildings with a special style and full of history. Xiu felt as if he had traveled through time. The bustling streets at that time seemed to appear in front of him. People were coming and going, and their voices were mixed together, making it very lively. It's just that these are gradually disappearing in the long river of history. Walking along, Xiu didn't know how long he walked. The surrounding buildings began to become sparse, and the plants gradually evolved from artificially planted ornamental flowers and plants to normal vegetation. Xiu knew that he was on the outskirts of Jobin City. However, he had no intention of returning and continued walking. A large piece of grass appeared in front of him, extending to a small hillside in front of him. This scene immediately reminded Xiu of the grassland in the park. It's just that the grassland in the park is very lush. The grass can be as short as the calf, and in the most exaggerated place, it can be as tall as half a person. There are many strange elves hidden in it, and a few of them may pop out when you step down. The grass here is very smooth, as if it has been specially trimmed. There are no elves on it, only scattered humans. Looking around, there are large and small blankets spread on the lawn. Most of these people are couples, families, or friends coming to have a picnic or play together. At this time Xiu Cai realized that he had been gone for a long time and it was already evening. Of course, only big cities can have such a scene. There are not so many idle people in ordinary towns. In other words, it is a matter of population ratio. Most of the people present are young and middle-aged people, who are the middle class and the main force of the city. After Xiu came out of the woods, he stood on the edge of the grass and watched the people coming and going. Another young man in bright clothes picked up the food in his hand and fed it to his girlfriend next to him. The two started to play around, laughing for a while. Some children were running back and forth on the grass, and laughter like bells echoed in the sky. There were several friends sitting around on the grass, talking to each other, with smiles on their faces. Some parents were playing with their children on the grass, and there were trainers interacting with the Pokémons. For some reason, Xiu suddenly felt a little tired, so he found a place to sit down and just watched those people silently. As time went by, he was a little dazed by the scene in front of him, but soon he reacted, and the smile on his face seemed a little helpless. "Sure enough, I'm not suitable," Xiu muttered to himself, then looked up, his eyes directly across the entire grass. After a while, he stood up and walked in the direction he came from. Just when he was about to go out, a voice called him. "Hey, little brother," a slightly mature voice called Xiu. At first, Xiu didn't pay attention, but the continuous voices still drew his attention. "Huh," Xiu was a little surprised, turned his head and looked behind him, only to see a thin middle-aged man smiling at him. The man was dressed casually, and there were two people beside him. One was a woman dressed in ordinary clothes. The woman was very pretty. Although she looked a little old due to the vicissitudes of life, she must have been a beauty when she was young. As for the little girl in a princess dress next to the man, she had delicate features, like a doll, but she was also thin and small, giving people a very weak feeling. Thanks to you 2003 for the reward. Adventurer of the Elf World. Author, Wu Nangkuang Song. Chapter 137. At first glance, they looked like a family. Judging from the checkered cloth spread on the ground, as well as the incubator and bamboo basket, they must have come for a family picnic. When the man saw Xiu looking over, he waved to him. Xiu subconsciously looked around and found that he was the only one. It seems that even the place he subconsciously picked is very remote. Xiu also walked over a little strangely and asked the man, "Hello, what's the matter?" When the little girl heard Xiu's voice, she raised her head and glanced at him, but her expression was a little careless. "It's okay. I see you were alone just now. If you don't mind, let's sit together." The man took out a bottle of water from the incubator next to him and handed it to Xiu. "Come on, let's drink some water first." No need." Xiu raised his hand and was about to push it away, but the man half stood up and forced the water into his hand, and said something with a smile. "Take it, it's too hot." Feeling the coldness on his hand, Xiuya could only accept it with a smile. "Thank you." Before Xiu could react, the woman on the side took out a box from the basket, opened it, smiled at Xiu and said, "We also have snacks here. If you don't mind, please try them." When Xiu heard this, he looked at the two people in front of him strangely. Why did he take care of him like this? Xiu couldn't say anything, it was just weird anyway. "If you're not in a hurry, just take a seat. There won't be this kind of weather here in a few days. If you want to play again, you'll have to wait until autumn." Xiu was a little surprised by their words, but he didn't have anything to do, so he just sat aside and started chatting with them. "Is it because of the weather?" "Well, you can also say that. However, there is a popular saying here, that is, the forest is very violent when entering the summer." Xiu listened to his words for a moment, because this area is full of grassland, with no trees for shade. In midsummer, the temperature can reach more than 30 degrees under direct sunlight. No one will come here to suffer at that time. It is only available in late spring and early summer. And there is an environment to play in autumn. Another problem is that this side is the suburbs, and further east is the Tokiwa forest. The elves in the summer forest are very irritable and aggressive. This kind of aggression is not only shown in the forest, but also often has elves running to the suburbs. Almost every year during this time, you can hear news about elves hurting people. Does the Alliance not care? Whatever, the man was also a very talkative person and started talking about this topic directly. "Look at the houses over there, they are all Alliance properties. When the time comes, the forest guards will withdraw from the forest and live there, and every summer the Alliance will organize trainers to strengthen patrols in the suburbs. And we residents generally will not come here, and it will only be reopened at the end of autumn." Xiu heard a rare term and asked curiously, "Forest ranger?" "Yes, there are many rangers in the Jaban forest, but they will temporarily withdraw during the summer and wait until the autumn to return to station. We in Jaban city all know this." "Then why are they stationed in Viridian forest?" "Because in addition to cities like Jaban city, there are many nearby villages and towns that have no connecting roads, and vehicles cannot enter, and there are only small roads for people to pass through. Therefore, forest rangers are needed to maintain these roads and at the same time know the situation in the forest." "What happens if the rangers withdraw from those towns?" "The ones who were evacuated were the rangers from deeper areas. What's more, the villages and towns that have survived until now are definitely fine. They will find their own way out." Xiu followed him and talked for a while about the situation around Jaban city. For a moment, he felt that he was right not to leave, otherwise he would not know that there are so many things going on in Jaban city. A different Jaban city than his impression was built in his mind. The man said and asked curiously, "Little brother, are you your trainer?" The current elf balls, whether they are the ordinary red and white balls of giant claw mantis and little lucky egg, or the special balls used by Casey, they do not have the function of shrinking. The 3 fist-sized elf balls worn on the body are somewhat conspicuous. But Chiu's pokeball was in his backpack. How could this person recognize his trainer? Chiu did not deny it, but directly asked. Why do you say that? Because your reaction was very ordinary when we talked about elves hurting people, but the questions you just asked are obviously your first time in Viridian City. Taken together, even if you are not a trainer, you are still someone who has come into contact with elves. I'm considered a nurturer, Shiu said casually, with a somewhat casual tone. But the man suddenly said with emotion. I also wanted to be a trainer back then. It would be so exciting to take risks, but... As he spoke, he looked at the gentle woman beside him, and his tone became gentle. I'm so lucky to have met you. The woman just smiled when she saw the man's condition. It was obvious that this was not the first time she had heard such words. But Chiu on the side was caught off guard and was stuffed with a mouthful of dog food, and for a moment he didn't know what to say. Chiu chatted with the middle-aged man and learned the reason why his family came here. The reason is very simple. When the middle-aged man had not yet made a fortune, his family conditions were very average, but he fell in love with the boss's daughter, and the amazing thing was that he actually got in touch with her. But this matter was soon exposed, which was of course opposed by the woman's parents, and in order to maintain contact, the two turned their relationship underground. As a famous dating mecca in Jaban City, it was just an ordinary suburb in those days. In order to get rid of the supervision of their parents, the two chose to date here. It was just two people who were soon discovered again, but this time the girl did not choose to compromise, but chose to elope with the boy. The man described what happened in an outsider's tone. As he spoke, he gently hugged the man next to him, and then said gently, I don't know what I would do without you. Shiu was just eating dog food on the side, especially as a new acquaintance, which seemed a bit embarrassing. But looking at the expressions of the two people in front of them, that trace of depression quickly turned into a blessing. Shiu also noticed the little girl beside him. He didn't know why, but Shiu had been sitting there obediently without saying a word until now. Originally, he just thought it was a shy child and didn't pay too much attention. But as if his gaze was discovered, the little girl turned her head slightly to look at him. At that moment, Shiu seemed to have touched something, and a strange feeling arose from the bottom of his heart, but it subsided in an instant, leaving only an inexplicable emptiness. Shiu took the initiative to look away, frowning slightly. Adventurer of the Elf World. Author, Wu Nangkuang Song. Chapter 138. What's wrong? The man's voice brought Shiu back to reality. He looked up and smiled and waved his hand. It's okay, I just remembered something. Shiu glanced at the little girl with his peripheral vision, but he didn't have the feeling just now. She was just an ordinary person. The man saw Shiu's absent-minded look, sighed, and then said some strange words. Alas, life will always encounter some ups and downs. Don't give up. You are still young. There is always hope if you work hard. The woman on the side also echoed, yes, there is nothing that can't be overcome. Don't give up easily. It was also very difficult when we first started, but we all got through it in the end. Shiu felt a little strange when he heard this, and was stunned for a while before he reacted. No wonder their family called him over just now, and brought water and snacks. It turned out that they had a misunderstanding when they saw him like that just now. After Shiu figured it out, he was a little amused and embarrassed. He wanted to explain but was afraid that it would only make things worse, so he just acquiesced and said, Thank you for your concern. I'm fine. I just miss home. The two of them smiled and nodded when they heard Shiu's words, and then the man took the initiative to change the subject. Yes, I was also like that when I drove to Hollywood alone. After chatting for a while, Shiu suddenly felt thirsty and remembered the bottle of water in his hand. It was just that after so long, it had already become room temperature and lost its initial coolness. Xiu didn't mind, he unscrewed it and took a sip, then looked around. Only then did he realize that the sun in the sky had already set, and most of the people around him had left, with only a few scattered people left. The man seemed to have reacted, turned around and glanced around, then laughed. Haha, I didn't expect you to know everything. We haven't had such a happy chat for a long time. Xiu knows a lot. Next time I will try the method you mentioned. It seems to be delicious. The woman next to him seemed eager to try it, and seemed to be looking forward to the taste of the snacks made according to Xiu's method. During the conversation just now, everyone exchanged names. Xiu also knew that the man's name was Qinjai, the woman's name was Miyao, and the little girl's name was Qianyang. Xiu didn't say much after hearing this, and took out 2 cans of preserved fruits from his backpack and handed them over. This is a snack I made myself. You can try it? Oh. I'll give it a try. Chenya was not polite. He opened it and ate a little. Then he handed the preserved fruit to his wife and said with a hint of surprise, "It's really delicious. Sweet and sour. What is it made of?" Blue-orange. Xiu couldn't forget the strange feeling just now. He looked at Qianyang, pushed another one in front of her, and said tentatively, "This is sweet. Children should like it." Qianyang's eyes shifted to the preserved fruit in front of her as he said this, but she still didn't say anything. Mei Yao saw this and picked up the can of preserved fruit and opened it. She ate a piece herself before putting the can in her daughter's hand. Xiu watched Qianyang slowly pick it up and eat it, but because the other party lowered his head, he couldn't see anything. However, Xiu didn't want to waste too much time on this matter. Anyway, it was almost time, so he stood up and said to the family, "It's getting late. I have to go back to the city. Goodbye. We are almost back. Let's go together. I'll take you back in my car." Shirano pointed to a car not far away. "It will take a long time to walk back." Xiu paused for a few seconds and then agreed. He had something else to do later, so there was no need to waste time on the road. The car drove into a remote street and slowly stopped. Shirano turned his head to look at Xiu and said, "We're here." "Thank you." Just as Xiu was about to open the door to go out, Shirano added another sentence. "The celebration will start tomorrow, have fun." Xiu smiled and nodded slightly, and said casually, "Yes, you guys have fun too." After that, he got out of the car, waved to them, and then walked into the dim and narrow old street. Xiu did not go directly back to the elf center, but went into the complicated and messy old building complex. This is the oldest place in the old city, and also the most chaotic place in Changpan City. The reason is that the design and planning at that time, there was no such thing as design and planning at that time, and the land was tight, so the buildings were all messy, and most of the streets were very narrow, and some could only accommodate one person. And there are no street lights here, only some key intersections have dim street lights that have been used for who knows how many years. Walking to such a place at night, the word chaos stands out. What's more terrifying is that there are pairs of prying eyes in the corners from time to time. But Xiu seemed to have been here many times, walking in it skillfully, and those eyes also avoided him after he passed by. Don't you really think that he was idle after walking around the old city for a long time during the day? After wandering around, Xiu passed through the most outrageous section of the road and came to the door of a 3-story building. The main structure is a brick wall structure, but the outer wall has peeled off in large pieces, revealing the red bricks inside. The ceiling is reinforced with iron sheets to prevent leakage, but the blue iron sheet has faded and there are some spots of rust on it. In fact, from the rental notice posted outside, it can be seen that this is a rental house, and it seems to have a history. This is it. Xiu glanced at the empty staircase and walked up the stairs on the side. The sound of a key being inserted came from outside the door, and a figure walked into the house with the dim light in the corridor. The figure closed the door casually, and the whole house fell into darkness again, but soon the sound of opening and closing was heard, and the next second the orange-yellow light filled the room. However, the person who came in couldn't help but tremble and screamed in fear when the light came on. Ha! Because there was an extra person in the room that should have been empty, what made him even more scared was the strange outfit of the person. The person was wearing a black casual jacket, and the hat covered his face in the shadow. He just sat leisurely on the holy sofa, giving people an extremely weird feeling. The man's first reaction was to turn around and want to open the door and run away, but when he really turned around, he heard such a sentence. "Kurikawa. The company is very dissatisfied with you." The man's steps suddenly stopped, and he looked up at the newcomer and asked tentatively. "Who are you? It's not good for you to know too much." The voice from under the hood was still the same. "You just need to know that I'm here to deal with the bookstore. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment." Adventurer of the Elf World. Author, Wu Nangkuang Song. Chapter 139. Bookstore. Are you the person sent here by Miss Yuen? Kurikawa thought for a moment and realized that this person should be the person mentioned above. "But why did you get here so quickly in just half a day?" "That's right." The hooded man slowly raised his head, but Kurikawa was even more shocked when he saw the dark hole scene. Under the hood, there was actually a mask that looked like a child's toy. But with the current environment and the dark aura of this person, it seems even more weird. For a moment, Kurikawa was stunned on the spot, not knowing what to do. Shiu observed Kurikawa through the mask. He was a middle-aged man who looked to be in his 40s or 50s. But Shiu knew very well that the man in front of him named Kurikawa was only 36 years old, and he knew his situation even more clearly. Because this person was the first batch of employees that Shiu personally selected, which is why Shiu wanted to conceal his identity. This man knew him. "Kurikawa, the boss trusted you and handed over the company's business in Jaban City to you, but is this how you work?" This statement made Kurikawa suddenly wake up. He subconsciously waved his hands and shook his head to explain, but he knew very well that he was certainly to blame for such a big problem in the bookstore, so he fell silent. Seeing that he didn't respond, Shiu had no intention of letting him go. He asked sternly, "Are you, the person in charge, also involved? Embezzling the company's property?" When questioned like this, Kurikawa was even calmer than before, and replied calmly. "It is indeed my negligence that this problem occurred in the bookstore, but I have not done anything to regret the company. The incoming and outgoing of the chain I control can be traced." Kurikawa was originally just an ordinary worker in Qianhong City. Due to time and family reasons, he did not read much. He went to work in a factory at the age of 15. With his tenacity and eagerness to learn, he rose from apprentice to foreman, and his work also gradually relaxed. At the same time, he had a happy family, with a virtuous wife and 2 children. Everything was normal until he collapsed in the workshop due to overwork. When he rested for a few days and wanted to go back again, he found that his position had been replaced by a new young man, and he was fired for a very ridiculous reason. "I have worked for the company for more than 10 years, but I still haven't been able to get any justice. All my hard work in the past seems to have been in vain." However, some familiar workers revealed to him the news about his days off. The young man was the nephew of the manager and had been interested in his position for a long time. Knowing this information didn't change anything, his dismissal was a reality. Although there was some compensation, it also meant that he also lost his source of funds. In order to get back to work as soon as possible, he had to travel back and forth to many factories. I thought he would be popular as an experienced technician, but reality gave him a hard blow. Almost no companies are willing to recruit people of his middle to high age with potential medical problems. Even if a company is willing to recruit him, it will be under the premise of constantly squeezing his benefits and salary. It's just that he can't accept this condition at all, because this little money can't afford the expenses of a family of 4. The previous treatment had already spent all the savings he had finally accumulated, and at the same time, he was burdened with the financial pressure of the entire family. The pressure from all aspects almost overwhelmed him for a moment. Just when he was forced to have no other choice, a man came to him. "If you have any problems, the company will naturally investigate them. I am only responsible for solving the problems." Shiu looked at Kurikawa's appearance and did not continue the topic. Instead, he said, "Let's go and work." "Go there." "Bookstore." Shiu stood up from the sofa, passed by Kurikawa, and left the room first. Kurikawa thought for a moment and followed him out. Outside the rental house is a slightly old white van, which is the official vehicle equipped for him by the company. After the two got in the car, they didn't communicate much, only silence. After a while, the van left the old city and drove towards the bookstore. Soon the car stopped on the roadside opposite the bookstore. Kurikawa stared at the lighted bookstore opposite, then looked back at Shiu, and found that he was flipping through the books in the car. His leisurely attitude made him couldn't help but ask, "What now?" Shiu opened the books casually and said unhurriedly, "The bookstore gets off work at 8:30, don't be in a hurry." When Kurikawa heard this, he could only suppress his anxious mood and stared at the bookstore opposite. But not 2 minutes after Shiu finished speaking, Kurikawa discovered that the lights in the bookstore opposite had dimmed, and a figure was closing the door. Upon discovering this, he quickly said, "He's out." Shiu looked up when he heard this, and then joked in a weird tone, "I left almost an hour early. I don't need to guess to know that I will be late in the morning, so I will be punished." For some reason, Kurikawa felt a chill when he heard these words, and the hair on his body stood on his head. "Follow me." Shiu threw the book aside and stared at the man walking on the street. This is not a very prosperous commercial street, not to mention that people in this world mostly watch TV at home for their evening entertainment, so the street is empty. After finishing his day's work, Shota is preparing to go home and enjoy a comfortable night life. But suddenly he felt something behind him, and he looked back without stopping, and found a hooded man walking with his hands in his pockets and his head down. The whole person was almost hidden in the darkness, and only when he passed by the street lamp from time to time did his outline appear, but his face was in the darkness of the hood, so he couldn't see his appearance at all. Shota glanced at him, and for some reason his expression immediately twisted, looking at the hooded man with contempt in his eyes, and spewing some trash words. "Tisk little Lotta on the side of the road." After saying that, he turned around and continued walking on his way. Since coming here, his life has changed dramatically. Not only did he get rid of the tiring work, but his income also soared sharply. As for the reason, naturally, it was because he was smart. The bookstore key was constantly thrown up, flying up and down in his hand, and he hummed a cheerful tune. Suddenly, the sound of hurried footsteps behind him made him subconsciously turn around, but this time he was greeted by a fist, and the way he turned around was as if he was sending his face over. A heavy punch directly knocked him flying, his body spinning and then falling heavily to the ground. The intense pain and the constant roar occupied his brain, and his entire soul seemed to be knocked out. Before he lost consciousness, he only heard the sound of brakes. The hooded man picked up the key that fell on the ground and looked around. Adventurer of the Elf World. Author, Wu Nangkuang Song. Chapter 140. Ah! The cold water woke Shota out of coma, and a pain penetrated into his brain. He subconsciously wanted to raise his hands to block it, but suddenly he felt that he could not move his hands. Water flowed over his head, and it took a few seconds for his vision to finally recover from the blur. Only then did he realize that his shirt had been stripped off at some point, and his hands were tied and hung on the beam. When he looked up, he saw a hooded man standing in front of him holding a water bottle. His consciousness suddenly flashed back, and Shota quickly remembered that this was the person who had been following him just now. "Who are you? What are you doing?" Through the firelight burning in the fire nearby, Shota saw that the surrounding environment was gray, and the rough structure looked like an abandoned house. The brain quickly woke up under the stimulation and tried desperately to struggle, but it was in vain with his hands and feet tied. When it became clear that he couldn't resist, Shota turned to beg and begged, "Brother, please let me go, I have all the money." But before he could finish speaking, the hooded man threw away the bottle, raised his hand and punched him on his exposed abdomen. Ah! After 2 punches, Shota lost the ability to speak. His eyes bulged, his mouth opened wide and his tongue spit out uncontrollably, and a trace of saliva flowed from his mouth. "Are you awake?" The hooded man raised his hand and pinched Shota's chin and pulled it up. Only then did Shota look at the strange mask under the hood. "Tch. Trash," Shiu casually said with a hint of disgust, and Shota's head fell directly. Shiu calmly stepped aside, then sat by the bonfire, picked up an iron bar and stirred the fire at will, and said in a calm tone, "Why do you think the company sent me to find you?" The scene fell silent, and after a few seconds Shota slowly raised his head and looked at Shiu. "What are you talking about?" A soft laugh came from under the mask. Shiu raised his head to face Shota and said slowly, "Why do you think the company will let you go?" "I don't know what you are talking about. You must have found the wrong person. I am the person in charge of the company in Jaban City. Put me down." Shota suddenly became very excited and struggled hard, but it was still in vain as before. Shiu didn't say anything, just looked at him with a smile on his eyebrows. After Shota gave up his struggle, Shiu looked to the other side and smiled. "He is looking for the person in charge of the company in Jaban City." Shota saw a ripple of darkness in the next second, and a person walked out of it. Using the firelight, Shota could clearly see the person coming and couldn't help but exclaim, "Kurikawa! Why are you here?" The corners of his mouth under the mask were slightly raised, and he said, "Are you still the manager of the company in Tokiwa City?" Shota was stunned for a moment, but it looked like he was obviously panicking at this time. Zyuya ignored his reaction and said to himself, "You, Shota, were originally just a gangster on the street. You had done all kinds of petty thefts and were caught several times. However, because you were underage and the crime was not serious, you were only detained for a few days and then released. In Qian the crime you committed is clearly recorded in Hong City's city records." Shiu sneered, and then continued, "But in the past few years, you have done nothing else, but you have developed a smooth tongue. The company took a fancy to your talent and gave you a chance to start a new life and recruit you as a salesperson. You are indeed worthy of this talent. Your grades are almost among the top in the company, and the company will give you the rewards you deserve and promote you to bookstore management in Jaban City." Shiu stopped stirring the fire with his hand, looked up at Shota, and said slowly in a very deep voice, "It's just, this is how you repay the company's respect for you." I don't know why Shota felt that those eyes were frightening, and he didn't dare to look at them, so he roared loudly, "I don't even know what you are talking about, let me go." "You will know." Shiu stood up, holding the iron bar that had just stirred the fire in his hand, and then slowly raised it and pointed it at Shota. "What are you doing?" "No. No," Shota struggled hard, but he could only watch the red-hot iron bar getting closer to him, and he could even feel the heat emanating from it. The iron bar stopped steadily in front of his face, and Shiu said a word. "Do you recognize it?" "No. I really don't." "You will never change your character." The tone that had been calm just now suddenly changed, and the iron bar was pressed directly on his chest. "Ah!" Shota screamed and tore through the entire space. His body struggled uncontrollably, and soon the aroma of barbecue gradually turned into a burning smell that filled the air. Kurikawa, who was watching from the side, also trembled with Shota's wail, but he didn't dare to do anything and could only stare. Shiu's hand holding the iron bar didn't shake at all, it was terrifyingly stable. He stayed there for 5 or 6 seconds before slowly retracting the iron bar. At this time, Shota's eyes rolled up, his face turned pale, and big beads of sweat kept dripping from his forehead. His body seemed to have lost its support. If it weren't for the ropes tied up, he would have fallen to the ground. The muscles on his body were constantly shaking. Also twitches. "I don't like this, but I gave you the opportunity, but you didn't cherish it?" Shiu casually threw the iron bar back into the fire, walked over and patted his cheek and mocked, no way you dare to embezzle the company's property just like that. Just now, there are many more to come, let's play slowly." When Shota heard this, his white eyes trembled and turned around, looking at Shiu with fear in his eyes. The person in front of him is not a human at all. It's a devil. Devil. Tell me you won't have to suffer all this after you finish. Shiu sat back in his previous position and picked up a branch beside him and threw it into the fire. For some reason, Shota always felt like he was burning himself when he looked at the rising flames, and he couldn't help but tremble. I. The shouting just now almost tore his throat, causing him to speak hoarsely now, and he could only swallow his saliva. Shiu didn't mean to urge him, and raised his hand to pick up the iron bar and tease it in the flames. When Shota saw this scene, his throat suddenly felt better, but the muscles in his chest kept twitching. I'll tell you. Shiu sat there silently listening to his self-narration, and the whole scene seemed to have a strange harmony. It was just that the iron bar in Shiu's hand was stirring the flames more and more violently. Suddenly, Shiu jumped up from his position and stabbed Shota's abdomen with the iron bar in his hand without mercy. Shota, who was not prepared at all, could not help but struggle in pain, and the wailing broke the silence again.